from scope creep to strategic offers. Too often, scope creep gets in the way of um, making progress. Many freelancers, independent operators think that our problem is scope creep. But I'm submitting that scope creep is usually just a visible symptom of the deeper issue, which is adjacent business models have started touching each other. And no one has decided which one of the business models governs the business. When this happens, what feels like flexibility can quietly become confusion. What feels like helping the client can turn into unstable pricing or work that wasn't paid for. What feels like I'll just add one more service can turn into a business where every decision competes with the time available to execute every other decision. Because I'm not asking today whether adjacent offers exist. Of course they do. I'm asking a more important question. When the business models touch, what is it that makes that connection dangerous versus strategic? What causes that touch to be conflict versus a strategic, valuable decision? And that question matters because the session that we're talking about today doesn't exist by itself. This topic sits inside the sequence that we've been building all quarter. Earlier this quarter, in January and going into February, we talked about agency, we talked about authority, and we talked about access. Agency is the ability to act. Authority is the ability to decide. Access is the ability to reach the people, the tools, the systems, the structures that are needed to carry out those decisions that you've decided with your authority. These ideas are not abstract. They're the foundation of everything that we're doing in this curriculum. Because when you run a business, especially when you run a solo business, you already have agency. You have the opportunity to learn any new skill. You can take on a new kind of client. You can adopt a new tool. You can add a service. You can say yes or no to almost anything. Just because you can act does not mean you have reason to have put every action inside the business. Just because you have the authority to make decision does not mean you have exercised that authority clearly and with deliberation. This is where the real tension lives. Back in February, when we worked through the 9-point marketing plan, we introduced Alex. Alex at the time was a web designer. He's a competent operator. He's experienced. He's useful. He's talented, capable, busy. And Alex's business looks normal at first glance. But when we look more carefully, we realize that the customer journey is disjointed. Different offers pointed in diverging directions. Different expectations were being created for different clients. Different kinds of work are being pulled into one business. And that one business is run by one person, and that one person is the manager and the doer in the business. Then on March 9th, so this month, we talked about when business models collide. We mapped Alex's activities to the 9 business models, and we saw something very important. Alex isn't just offering different services. Alex is inadvertently drifting between business models at the same time. Each of these business models comes with its own client expectations and pricing structure. Then last week, when the session was titled, When Identity and Economics Don't Match, we also looked at how Alex describes the business. And we found that even his identity had drifted. The words Alex might use at a networking event no longer cleanly describe the economics of the business. So today we take the next step. So far we've looked at places on the seams as potential instability points. The places where risk arises without acknowledgement. Today we're going to ask a different question. Now that we've seen the risks of accidental mixing, let's look at how the adjacent models can be connected on purpose. Because the seams themselves between the business models aren't bad. The seams are simply amoral realities. And sometimes connecting between the models is a mistake, and other times it is a deliberate and strategic business decision. Here's the point. A seam can be an opportunity if the governing model of the business is clear. Otherwise, it has the potential to become an undetected risk, and that is today's lesson. This title is deliberate. I did not call the session more about business models or when to group the business models together. I titled it deliberately, From Scope Creep to Strategic Offers, because that is the movement that we're trying to help people make. Not from simplicity to complexity, not from ignorance to expertise, not from core to scale, from accidental expansion to a deliberate architecture. I don't think any independent operator wakes up one morning and decides, I'm going to create the most structurally confused business I can. That is not how this happens. It happens one decision at a time, one reasonable decision at a time, one helpful answer at a time, one client request at a time, one new tool, one new skill. Each of them seems reasonable in the moment because each individual move makes sense at that time and in isolation. And when it does, the deeper underlying structural shift goes unnoticed, which is why this lesson matters. We're not trying to make adjacent offers disappear. We're trying to make the governing logic of the business in dealing with that adjacent offer visible. Because once the logic becomes clear, then the seams can be managed. Once the seams can be managed, some of them might even become strategic decisions. So we're going to reopen the Alex case study, not because he's a case study, but because Alex is the story that helps us make sense of the curriculum. On February 23rd, during the 9-point marketing plan session, Alex showed us that what happens when the structure is weak at the level of the customer journey. The issue wasn't that Alex lacked offer. The issue was that the services being offered didn't line up cleanly with one coherent customer journey. Then in when business models collide on March 9th, we saw that the issue was deeper than the messaging of the journey. Alex's work wasn't simply scattered, it was crossing economic boundaries. Websites and funnels, SEO, CRM builds, automation, subscriptions, white label agency support work. Each one of these touched a different kind of business model with a different pricing strategy. And that session is where the phrase came from that nothing Alex is doing is irrational, but it isn't coherent. On March 16, then, in the identity vignette, we looked at another layer. We looked at what does Alex say his business is? What words does Alex use? How does Alex answer the what do you do question? And what we saw is that the identity and the economics were not aligned. Sometimes the words Alex uses makes him sound like a web designer. Sometimes it makes him sound like a SaaS founder. Sometimes it's a systems strategist who talks about growth websites. Sometimes it's a more generic digital agency. But his invoices don't show a clear story of these are the primary services and these are the supporting or occasional services. He was trying to be all things to all people and not clearly operating as any one thing. And one of the things we talked about is if you're a 20-person agency, you probably can have a 3 or 4 person team doing this and a 3 or 4 person team doing that and a 3-person team doing the other thing. When you're a solo operator, you don't have that flexibility. Which means we're ready for the next question. If the seams between the models can create friction when they are accidental, can they also create opportunity if and when they are deliberate? And my answer is yes, but usually only when the governing model is absolutely clear in the business owner's mind. So before we go further, we need a working definition. What is the seam? The seam is the place where two adjacent business models touch. That touch point might show up in the offer. It might show up in pricing. It might show up in fulfillment or delivery. It might show up in a partnership structure or a referral relationship. It might show up in the onboarding or in the support services, in the follow through, in the implementation. It might show up as advice or advocacy. The seam itself is not the problem. I say it again, the seam itself is not a problem. The problem comes when the seam is unacknowledged. A seam that exists but has not been named. A seam that changes expectations without anyone noticing the shifting expectations. The seam that changes the pricing logic without someone pricing differently. Okay. The seam that changes responsibility without anyone updating the offer. The seam that quietly turns a clean, specific service into that vague gray generalist, my marketing guy zone. And this is why freelancers often feel like they are doing a little bit of everything, because the seams create adjacency, and adjacency creates temptations. If I build websites, maybe I should also offer copy. And if I offer copy, maybe I should also be doing SEO. Well, if I do SEO, maybe I should also manage email campaigns. And if I manage email campaigns, maybe I should resell the platform that the email campaigns run on. Or if I resell the platform that has the email campaigns, it also has other automations as well as the email campaign. So I should offer more automations. And if I offer automations, maybe I should offer an AI receptionist as well. and the scope creep happens. And then the client asks for strategic advice, and maybe I should be a marketing consultant too. And the point is, none of those moves in and of themselves are obviously wrong. They might, in fact, be right in a particular situation, but they are not neutral moves either. Each one of those moves potentially changes the kind of business that the solopreneur is operating. And this is why I say we need the language of seams, because the seams let us say, this new offer is not just another service within my current business. This is a junction between different economic models with different delivery expectations and different pricing logic. A seam can be an opportunity if the governing model is clear. Otherwise, it has the potential to become undetected risk. Because the question isn't whether the models can touch. The question is which model governs the relationship and which models are supporting. This is the central contrast of the lesson. Unacknowledged seams create a hidden friction. Deliberately structured seams create opportunities. An unacknowledged seam becomes an undetected risk when the operator adds a service because it seems adjacent, but they don't realize what has changed in their business. Because what might have changed could be the client's expectation of the provider's responsibility, the pricing logic, the time burden, the support burden, the business model itself. For example, when a web designer adds email campaign support, at first it seems like a value add. It makes the website more valuable. But email campaign support implies ongoing optimization, list hygiene, deliverability from a technical standpoint, copy revisions, audience segmentation, reporting. It's not just one more service. It is an entire business in and of itself. It is an entirely different relationship with the client and with the client's database than a web designer, web host. Or if someone resells a CRM platform as an affiliate or as a value-added subscription to some other service, at first it sounds like easy recurring revenue. But that CRM platform comes with onboarding requirements, custom setups, training, troubleshooting, maintenance. That subscription is no longer just a subscription. It's a whole different business model. The operator may now be carrying implementation or support obligations while only being paid as an affiliate. Because the client expects SaaS support and the operator is getting paid an affiliate commission. Or it could be that the operator is asked a strategic question. Well, what should our processes be? Well, what should be happening so that you can automate it? What should our SOPs be? What should our SOPs be? That's not an automation specialist's work. That's a business process consultant's work. That seam is no longer implementation. That seam has drifted over into advising, coaching, consulting. And if the operator whose specialty is automations starts fulfilling that role by default because someone needs to do it without recognizing the shift to the fact that they're now doing consultant level work, the build could stall, expectations start blurring, and their solo business quietly drifts into a different business model, possibly a model that operators not even qualified to fill, but more importantly, certainly a role the operator isn't being paid to fill. Because when I say risk here, I don't mean risk in some vague or abstract sense. In business, risk is almost always measured financially. And the risk is if you charge for one thing while client expectations quietly expand into something that costs you much more to deliver, now you are fulfilling without compensation. This is one of the most common ways that well-intentioned small and individual operators get into trouble financially. At first, underpricing feels like under uh, mm, it feels like a way to demonstrate value. It feels like over delivering on the price that you're charging. It can feel generous. It can feel helpful. It might even feel like a strategic move. I'm positioned this way. I offer all of this for this price. And it works for a short period of time. But when that extra service is not chosen by the operator, but instead imposed by client expectations, it will stop feeling generous and start becoming exploitative. The operator has said yes to one adjacent need, and then another, and then another. And before long, they are carrying agency level responsibility, support version, advisory roles, while still being compensated only according to the earlier, smaller scoped offer. That is not just a messaging problem. That is not just a scope problem. That is not an offer problem. That is financial risk created by an unacknowledged scene empowered by disconnected expectations. And one of the reasons that this matters morally as well as financially is that people should be compensated for the value they create, not merely for how cheaply they can be persuaded to do the work. A scene becomes a strategic lever when the operator understands that the adjacent model is real and intentionally decides how it should relate to the core business. That relationship might be an upsell, a downsell, a cross sell, but it might also be a referral handoff or a joint venture specialist partnership. It might be a project add-on, additional service. It might be a complimentary subscription when the operator knows deliberately that that's what they're doing. Or it might be inserting a coach, advisor, consultant into the mix. The difference is avoiding complexity by being clear. An accidental theme says, well, I guess we can do that too. A strategic theme says, this adjacent offer does support the core offer in a specific way. Instead of, yeah, we'll add it, it's this is why we will add it. And this is the compensation that goes with adding. That is the major distinction. Which leads us to talk about the guardrail. This is the sentence that I would want someone to remember if they forget everything else. A seam could be an opportunity if the governing model is clear. Otherwise, it has the potential to become an undetected risk. The phrase governing model matters because it tells us which set of rules determine the relationship. not which capability exists, not which skills the operator has, not which tools are in the tech stack, which model, which business model governs the relationship. If web design governs the relationship, then hosting, maintenance, platform subscriptions sit inside as included complements. If SWAS, software with a service, governs the relationship, then onboarding, implementation, and ongoing support can sit within the base price because it's this ongoing subscription as expected support layers. If support services govern the relationship, then ongoing maintenance would be included, but custom development might exist as a project-based additional service, but that would not change the identity of the support business, the support services relationship. If marketing implementation or agency kinds of service govern the relationship, then reporting, analytics, and execution all become reasonable expectations of the base offer. If an advisor, consultant, or coach role governs the relationship, then diagnosis, process design, product or subscription recommendations, or analytics might be the expected outcomes. Here's the point. Unacknowledged seams create friction. Deliberately structured seams create opportunities. A seam can be an opportunity if the governing model is clear. Otherwise, again, it becomes a potential to become an undetected risk. The question is not whether the models can touch. The question is which model is governing the relationship provider to client. If no governing model has been named, the seam becomes risky because every adjacent model begins competing with the core center offer. This is when the operator starts saying things like, we do funnels and websites and automation and AI and marketing strategy. And then wonders why prospects are confused, or why pricing feels off, or why no single message seems to land. And this is why I separate the concept of seams as opportunity from the concepts of seams as collision. A collision happens when the operator crosses business models boundaries without awareness. A seam is the place where the business models potentially can be joined into a cohesive offer that solves a problem in the marketplace. So, yes, the exact same boundary between business models can be either a source of friction or a source of leverage. The difference is whether that interaction, as the relationship crosses that boundary, is structured deliberately or inadvertently. So now we transition from diagnosis to design. We look at Alex, who started with a clear offer: web design, web hosting. It's understandable. It creates a clear sales conversation, a clear client expectation, a clear project type. The scope is clear, the value proposition is clear. Instability for Alex did not appear because website design is a bad business model. It appeared because adjacent capabilities started accumulating without the governing model ever being declared. So we're going to imagine what it would look like if Alex were to rebuild the business on purpose, not by erasing his adjacent skills, not by pretending those capabilities don't exist, but by deciding how those capabilities should relate to whatever the core business is. And here are three cleaner versions. Web design. In this version, Alex decides that web design remains his governing business model. That means the business is first and foremost a web design business, not a vague, gray, generalist digital marketing bucket not a we help with everything. Web design governs the relationship. I build websites for people and I help them make sure that website turns into business. The website is the centerpiece. The other activities are supporting. Once that is clear, the seams become easier to manage. Alex can offer hosting that complements web design. Alex can offer a recurring SaaS platform or affiliate subscription as a complement to the core design offer. The products might be from across the seams that are integrated into the support system that works around the offer, but they don't redefine the business, they support the core. Should Alex offer SEO? Maybe, but that's not actually the best question. The best question is, should SEO sit inside the core offer, supporting the existence of the website to begin with, or should it sit across the seam as a adjacent offer? If the governing model is web design, Alex might be better served by building a referral relationship with a strong SEO specialist, or if he does offer that service, he might do so as a separate upsell of an additional service. That keeps the seam productive without turning it into scope creep of free SEO tied to the website. And the same might apply to email marketing. A referral partner cross-sold through the relationship instead of absorbing the work personally. And suppose this client starts asking, well, what should my marketing plan be? How should we structure the customer journey? What happens when the customer lands on the site? What's the right message for this offer? At that point, the client might not need more implementation. They might need advice, diagnosis, a coach or a consultant, someone whose actual business is strategy and guidance. Alex can still own the web design relationship without pretending to own every advisory conversation. The seam can be deliberate. Alex can remain the web design operator and bring in the advisor at the point in the relationship where planning and study matters more than execution. So in this version, the seam becomes strategic because Alex knows exactly what his business is. Web design governs the relationship with Alex's clients. Everything else either complements or is an additional paid service or is supporting of the client through trusted partners. This is a much cleaner architecture than we do a little bit of everything marketing. Or SWAS, software with a service. In this version, Alex decides that the governing model is no longer project-based web design. Now the governing model is a productized service, a recurring system subscription in a software with a service, SWAS model. This is an entirely different business. The website is no longer the primary project deliverable. It is part of the recurring package, but it is a template rather than a custom design. Because SWAS is all about a standardized, productized service that is the same for every single client and is therefore scalable. A web design is by nature a custom project, one-off, each one is a custom deal. The website that comes with a SWAS offer is a template, pre-formatted, or maybe AI generated. But the CRM, the hosting, the scheduling, the automation, communication tools, all of that is part of the SWAS toolkit. And notice what changes. Onboarding and support for that toolkit are no longer accidental additional services. They're expected parts of the system that the subscription covers. Clients entering this model expect setup, onboarding, and maintenance fees. So the implementation seam is not the problem here. the implementation belongs. It is included in the base price of a productized service because the system subscription governs the relationship. But this doesn't mean Alex doesn't per doesn't mean, and it doesn't mean Alex should personally absorb every adjacent specialty, ads management, on and offsite SEO for this productized website template, the strategy, the brand architecture, email marketing. These all could still belong in referral or partner lanes. The difference is that the recurring package remains the centerpiece, and included support serves the package. Adjacent partnerships reinforce the package. And when in the SLAS model, clients move from, can you set this up for me, to questions like, how should my process work? What should my pipeline be? What does my growth strategy look like now that I have this package of tools? That second set of questions is not implementation questions for the productized service. It is a business advisory or strategy or consulting question. So instead of Alex quietly doing consulting while being paid for a productized service, the SEAM could be Alex introducing an advisor whose business model is brand authority, business coaching, systems analysis, strategic guidance. A recurring system can be governed by SWAS, while strategic guidance is brought in through a deliberate authority SEAM. This protects the business model instead of muddying it. And again, the point is so that the seams don't drift. The seams are arranged around the governing model, and once this is true, the operator can decide with much more confidence that belongs inside the offer, that belongs in standard onboarding and setup. This belongs to a specialist partner. This is an additional paid add-on. This belongs with an advisor. That is deliberate model architecture. Or the support agency. This option is particularly interesting because it shows how Alex's newer skills can legitimately shift the center of the business. In this model, or this option, Alex decides that the governing model is declared to be support services, not web design, not agency breadth, not the generalist marketing guy, not the productized service SWAS offer. Support service. Support services means that the primary offer becomes things like the CRM build out, the onboarding, the maintenance, the customization of the automations, the troubleshooting, the client system support. This in and of itself is a coherent business. And in this business, Alex's newer skills start making a lot of sense. If Alex has become strong at the CRM technical support issues on the backside, then the business might genuinely shift from design first of a website to support first of systems. This is not drift if it is declared, if it is an intentional change in the governing business model. And in this case, where do websites go? They do not have to disappear. They could be templated, they could be AI generated, or they could be vibe coded, or they could still be custom websites, but they remain in Alex's portfolio as on a project basis with separate pricing. And they no longer define the identity of the company. The agency is a support agency who occasionally on a project basis provides websites. They become this additional available service, not the governing core. And this is a critical distinction. Keeping the offer available on the portfolio is not the same as letting it govern the business. Because many times when we start talking about niches, Operators start thinking they must throw away skills to gain clarity. I'm not suggesting that you should discount or ignore your skills. What we must do is stop letting every skill compete for the center core of our business. And the reality is, because support agencies live near the software and the systems environments, it would also make sense that Alex is going to have some of his own SaaS or SaaS clients. Alex is going to offer affiliate subscriptions. Alex is going to continue to do custom development and custom web design for partners. But the core of his offer starts becoming tech support for other agencies or tech support for people, for companies who have that platform who don't have internal capacities. These adjacent services aren't a problem unless they are unacknowledged, in which case they become undetected risks. When the support agency model governs the relationship, the other seams start being structured clearly. Websites can be project work. Custom development can be in a specialist lane, or it can be a premium paid complement. Yes, I do this support as my core offer. I also can do these kinds of builds for you as an additional service. In a support-oriented business model, Alex might be very good at building the infrastructure, maintaining the systems, customizing the workflows, translating the requirements into tools. But when the client starts asking those, what should the process even be? How should the business work? What are we trying to build here? I see what we're building. What is the objective? Why doesn't this system make sense for how we currently operate? Those kinds of questions might be beyond implementation, and trying to answer those questions can slow the project down, muddy expectations, and shift Alex into a consulting identity that he was not prepared to declare. When Alex asks for diagnosis rather than implementation, the right move may be to bring in an advisor rather than stretching the support role into an undeclared and often unpaid consulting role. That is the seam. It is a collision when it's unpaid and undeclared. It's a strategy when it is named deliberately and managed by governance. This is the practical test. A seam becomes a strategic lever when the governing model is clear. That comes first because everything else depends on it. If the center is unclear, the seam is unstable. Client expectations should be explicit. The client needs to know what is core included versus what is adjacent or referred or project work. What is included support versus what is strategic partnership, what is advisory. When the expectations stay fuzzy, the seam stays dangerous. The seam becomes a financial risk. One reason explicit expectations matter is simple. When the seam is unclear, compensation and responsibility drift apart. And that's where underpricing becomes exploitation instead of generosity. Pricing logic needs to match the business model. If the work behaves like support services, price it like support. If the work behaves like a recurring software system, price it like a productized service, a system. If it behaves like a project-based deliverable, price it like a project. If it behaves like a referral, don't inject a price artificially. If it behaves like advisory, don't quietly bury it inside implementation pricing and then wonder why the scope feels wrong. The seam should support the core offer rather than silently replacing it. This is another place where operators will often drift without noticing. A small add-on accidentally becomes the center core offer. A support task that isn't the core offer actually absorbs a major labor burden without being compensated appropriately. A recurring complementary service becomes the part that the client cares about most, but it's not the core offer. A strategic conversation, hey, what do you think we should do here, quietly turns into free coaching or consulting. If the shift is real and deliberate, that's fine. But in that case, the governing model needs to be redeclared. I am now this kind of agency. A seam has the potential to become an undetected risk, or it could be an opportunity if the governing model is clear. And finally, you should know what kind of seam you're working with. Is it an upsell? Is it a downsell? Is it a cross-sell? Is it a referral lane or a specialist partnership? Is it a support layer or a project add-on? Is it the introduction of an advisor or coach? Naming the seam correctly is one of the easiest ways to stop accidental drift. Because once something is named, it can be governed. And then you have restored your agency for your business, your authority for your business, your access for your business. The question is not whether these models should touch or can touch. The question is, which of the business models governs the relationship with the client? So we're going to zoom out and place this lesson where it belongs in the sequence. On March 9th, we saw the danger of accidental model collision. On March 16th, we saw how identity and economics can drift apart. Today, on March 23rd, we looked at the constructive portion, the idea. Those two were the downside, the negatives. Today, we talked about how adjacent models can work together on purpose, which brings us back to the core sentence of the lesson. Unacknowledged seams create friction. Deliberately structured seams create opportunity. And that is the movement from accidental model drift to deliberate model architecture. And this session matters because it sits immediately before the next two public trainings, which are with our friends Dave Robbs and David Robbs. On March 30th, Dave will join us for What Business Are You Building? This is the next logical step after today. Because once you understand that the adjacent models can be connected deliberately, the next question becomes unavoidable. Which business should govern the structure of your business? This is the declaration question. And on April 6th, both Dave and David will join us for Pricing in a Global Economy. And that lesson matters because different governing models produce different pricing logic. The same seam that looks like a low-cost alternative in one model might be an entirely wrong strategic move in another. Which is why one of the key ideas in that lesson will be just because you can price low doesn't mean you should price low. Pricing makes sense only after structure makes sense. And when you're marketing on a global stage, price is part of your message. The reason we're bringing Dave and David into the public training now is not just to have guest speakers for these two important lessons. It's also because they've agreed to be available in the private workshop on CoLab for business coaching and consulting advising. They bring experience across multiple industries and in different tiers of business, which matters because many of the conversations that I'm having with you are easy enough to understand in theory, but much easier to apply to your situation when you can talk them through with people who have worked through these kinds of structural decisions in real businesses in different industries. So if you want to talk through how these ideas apply to your specific situation, that is the kind of discussion we have in the CoLab group. And as the year progresses, We're going to build on the curriculum from here. We're going to talk about ethical automation. We're going to talk about customer experience as a strategic move. We're going to talk about lifetime value as income stability. We're going to talk about how referrals and reviews cycle the 9-point marketing plan back around to lead capture and lead nurture. These are not disconnected topics. They are downstream from the same core issue. What business is governing your work? Because you do not want to automate confusion. You do not want to build customer experience on top of unstable expectations. You do not want to chase lifetime value in a business model whose core is still unclear. And you definitely do not want to ask for referrals when the business itself is still hard to describe. So here's the reflection question that I'm going to leave you with today. Where in your business model are conflicting offers already touching? And are those seams currently functioning as undetected risk or deliberate strategic levers? Because once that becomes visible, the architecture of the business begins to come into focus. And when the architecture becomes visible, declaration of the business model, governing business model becomes possible. And once declaration of the governing business model is possible, then alignment of all the optional offers can finally begin. Thank you for thinking with me today.